1967 was a year of protest over the Vietnam War, and more specifically the shutting down of Pandora's Box, a popular nightclub for teens at the time. This protest was also known as the Sunset Strip Riots. The song For What It's Worth by Buffalo Springfield was written with the Sunset Strip riots in mind. However, it has also been widely interpreted to be for protest against the war in Vietnam. Pandora's Box was turned into a teen nightclub in 1962. Soon after, many teens and young adults were getting arrested every weekend for loitering and breaking the 10 p.m. curfew. Weekend after weekend, teens continued to be arrested for violation of the rules, and as these arrests began to build up, the teens decided that enough was enough. For 6 weekends straight, teens and young adults together began to protest. At times, there were as many as 2,000 people involved in the street demonstrations. Teenagers involved believed that enforcing curfew and loitering laws was a violation of their civil rights. As a result, movies were made about these riots as well as songs such as the song For What It's Worth by Buffalo Springfield, which was originally called There's Something Happening Here.
The song's meaning can be reapplied to the protests of the Doves and the Hawks in regards to the Vietnam War in the time period of the 1960s to the early 70s. Much of the United States population, including a majority of the younger generation, were against the involvement of the U.S. in Vietnam and Cambodia. The nation was split between pro-war Hawks and anti-war Doves, each of whom led their own protests. Protesting grew in strength in 1965 and continued to do so. Methods of protest ranged from peaceful demonstrations such as tearing draft cards and marches to acts of violence.
There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from
There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everyone is wrong. Young people speaking their minds, getting so much resistance from behind. In this verse, Stephen Stills illustrates how two sides are being formed and both think the opposing side is wrong. The young people were the teenagers and young adults at the nightclub being arrested for standing up for what they believed.
In the case of the Vietnam War, the young people speaking their minds are the young generation that were opposed to the war, but were experiencing great resistance by the federal government, who refused to listen to them and pull out of Vietnam, and by the police.
What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and a carrying signs. Mostly say hooray for our side.
This next verse talks about the demonstrations and riots that occurred in the streets of Sunset Strip, the many people who marched with signs and chanted words of protest.
Thousands of people poured into the streets and marched in protest of the war. Many of them carried homemade signs and sang and chanted as they marched.
Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the man come and take you away.
This verse explains the fear in the lives of the counterculture generation not knowing what would happen next, and knowing that if they step out of line, just as the song says, they will be taken away by the police.
This verse could relate to how soldiers may have felt during the war. There was constant paranoia that the enemy may jump out of nowhere due to the guerrilla and jungle warfare present in the war. Many soldiers became so paranoid that they came back with mental disorders, such as post-traumatic stress disorder. Everywhere they went, they were afraid of getting killed. With one mistake, their life could end.
You better stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
The protesters were trying to make a point and could only do so by getting the attention of the police. The lyrics of the chorus describe how people needed to stop and listen to the protesters' side of the story before taking action and arresting so many people.
The chorus could be seen as a message to the government to stop what they're doing, open their eyes, and observe all the protests happening across the nation against the war.